I'd like to introduce this session by saying what was the thinking behind this session when we were planning this conference. We've, over the last day and a little bit of today, we've talked about various issues that are common not just to different ministries and departments, but also common to different states in terms of how do you leverage technology for development. We've talked about public-private partnerships, which raised some very interesting questions. We've talked about financial inclusion most recently. We've talked about the institutionalization of electronic service delivery. We've talked about how do you secure data, how do you manage identities. And the one way that we thought it would be a fitting way to end this conference would be to get people from different states and senior administrators who actually work very closely with successful programs and also have a body of experience from a variety of roles that they've played over their careers. Unfortunately, we've had two regrets this morning. Mr. Chawla, who was to travel, was called away for a Chief Minister's meeting, and Dr. Sharma could not make it either because he had a high-level meeting. But we still have a power-packed panel, and I'd now like to invite our moderator for the day. And the reason why I think no one else could moderate a session like this was that someone who is on the inside would be able to do justice to closing a conference like that. I'd like to invite Mr. Ravi Saxena, who is the Additional Chief Secretary, Department of S&T, Government of Gujarat. Welcome, sir. And this is also, as I've been talking to Mr. Saxena, and this is also a reunion of sorts. I'd like to now invite Mr. Deshdeepak Verma, who is the Secretary Parliamentary Affairs with the Government of India. He and Mr. Saxena are batchmates and very good friends. And last but not the least, I'd like to invite Mr. Ajay Sahni, who is the Principal Secretary, Department of Health, Medical and Family Welfare, the Government of Andhra Pradesh. Mr. Sahni was most recently the President and CEO of NEGD, and also hails from a state which has taken rapid strides in e-governance in India, Andhra. I welcome you all, sir. Thank you so much for being here today. Mr. Saxena, sir, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I'm very happy to be here with this illustrious panel. Deshdeepak Verma, as Priti said, not only my batchmate, but I know who brings deep insights into the issues of governance, administration, and challenges of reaching out to the common man. And Ajay Sahni, who's been the last 5 years active into the e-governance of the country as the CEO of NEGD, National E-Governance Department. 2 years in NEGD. So, good deal of National E-Governance program has been the result of the thought process that Ajay has developed in the Department of Information Technology and Electronics. Well, the issue that we're going to discuss for the coming 1 hour, or I think 1 hour and a half, is the way forward. The way forward after all that has been discussed today and last 2 days. The way forward can be nothing but what fulfills the aspirations of the people. The governance has to move forward in a direction which fulfills and meets with the expectations of the people. No other way could be having validity except the one which meets with the expectations of the people. What is it that the people expect? Why is it that the expectations of the people are moving so fast? Why is it that we see in a jiffy a large number of young people assembling for a singular cause and making such an impact on every dimension of the government and social organizations. It is because of the ICT, the information and communication technology, that today the entire paradigm of governance is going through a massive transformation. And that is also the reason why the expectations of the people are also moving faster than what the government can meet. And that is where the challenge, that is the singular quintessential challenge to the whole business of governance. Are you moving faster or the people moving faster in terms of fulfilling and raising the expectations? The ICT has brought about the tools of ICT, which are available in the hands of people, are, as a matter of fact, raising expectations which most governments across the globe are finding difficult to meet with. And this challenge must be met with, must be understood, must be appreciated, lest the entire paradigm of governance collapses. This is what has been seen in the agitation that you have from Australia to Washington in one night, Occupy Wall Street. This is what you've seen in Middle East happening. This is what you're seeing, the congregation of people for singular cause with kind of emotional backing which is taking place is hugely due to the ICT, which is making people move faster than the government. ICT is intervening in the lives of millions, and what are the factors which are instrumental in ICT becoming such an important and such a huge tool? And I think one of the most important things is the connectivity. Today you have more than 900 million mobiles in this country. They're all connected. You have internet across, internet of course the penetration is not so good. Today you have just about 150 million internet connections. You still don't have so much of connectivity as you can imagine. As a matter of fact, when you extrapolate, if there was connectivity across the villages, what would happen to the paradigm of governance? What would be the challenge to the governance if you had, and what with National Optical Fiber Network and the National Broadband Plan underway, when the connectivity is going to be available for the billion that we have in this country, and this is what is required for the government to appreciate before it's too late as to how should be the paradigm of governance transformed once they are planning broadband across the country. Now, you have also provided today computing power in the hands of primary school children across the entire country, including the rural area, through Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan has led to computer labs right in the schools of the villages. All younger generation of this country, and India is going to be the youngest country in 2020. The average age of India in 2020 would be just about 32. While the rest of the world, mostly the Western world, is going to be, the average age there is going to be 60. India is going to be the country of the young. And all these young people, the billion at that time, would all have grown up with computing as a part of their curriculum in their childhood, thanks to Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan. You have today National E-Governance Program, which is leading to three components. I would like, of course, Ajay to describe in more details, and I pose, of course, this question to him also. You have today wide area networks which have been created in every state. You have SWAN's state wide area networks. In Gujarat, which is one of the most robust wide area network anywhere in any other part of the country, because it is 10 years older than the NEGP. Today we have 120,000 mail addresses of government officials on the mail exchange server of the state wide area network. We have 5,000 offices across the state connected through the single wide area network. We have a common application backbone called Integrated Workflow and Document Management System, which makes the entire work of the government flow from one department to another on this wide area network. Today we are engaged with the exercise of developing the budget of the state, which would be done totally paperless. Not a single paper would move while the budget of the state is developed. We have 1500 treasuries, sub-treasuries, all connected, and the ways and means position, second to second, is available. Any penny spent or any penny earned in any nook and corner of the state is recorded immediately and is available on the books instantaneously, thanks to this wide area network. So that one of the strengths, one of the factors of transformation is that every state has got a wide area network. You have state data centers across the entire country. State-of-the-art data centers are there. And then you have service delivery gateways, state service delivery gateways, you have mobile service delivery gateways, and a host of applications are being launched almost every other day in some part of the country or other, which are taking the delivery to the people through either mobile or any other device which is available in the villages. So you have this kind of empowerment already being done through NEGP. Though I hold the view, of course, and during the course of this discussion, I'd like to say NEGP today, the form in which it exists has come of age, and we should call it NEGP 1. And it is high time government of India should think of NEGP 2, because the NEGP 1 itself has raised the expectations and has created enablers which are posing a challenge to the governance. And the area where government has not been able to meet with the challenge of the National E-Governance Program is the government process reengineering. The processes through which we take decisions in the government still belong to the good old British times. We are still following the procedure manuals which were created by the British. We still follow the system of a section first analyzing an issue and putting it up to Under Secretary, Deputy Secretary, Joint Secretary, and the old way we are still doing a lot of decision making, which perhaps is going to be absolutely obsolete and counterproductive, and in not being able to meet with the expectations of expediency and efficiency and effectiveness which the current ICT revolution is sweeping the country with. So government process reengineering requires a fresh and a very serious look, as that is one area which has remained without being changed. We have been moving in the direction of financial and digital inclusion in multiple ways. But I think NEGP 1 has not considered the impact or the effect that this financial and digital inclusion is going to have on the expectations of the people. All departments of the government of India must have a single view and a unified thinking about meeting with the expectations as the empowerment and enabling steps are taken by the Department of Information Technology in terms of financial or digital inclusion being carried out. Today you have Postal Department, which is just launched a program where every postman is proposed to be given a handheld device, which will also act as a mobile bank. Now, most of these things, now there are many other organizations which are moving in the direction of financial inclusion. There are many organizations which are moving in the direction of digital empowerment. But these are tools. And what happens when these tools get into the hands of people? When these tools get into the hands of the people, government also has to review the paradigm of governance that is required to be clearly understood. So that brings us to the question of what is the future of governance. Future of governance is what needs to be understood in good time, and which is the point which I have been hammering until now. Governance itself is going to change. ICT revolution is a bigger revolution than what Industrial Revolution was. Industrial Revolution swept the power of capital, the capital and through the hands of people who owned the assets, the industry. Here it is knowledge which is getting swept in the hands of people who own the ICT tools in their hands. And I personally deeply believe that ICT revolution is causing a greater divide than what the Industrial Revolution did. The Industrial Revolution caused a divide, and you had Karl Marx, you had Cold War, which persisted for 40 years, 50 years, perhaps longer. ICT revolution is going to cause a knowledge divide, which is going to cause anguish in the hearts of a very large cross-section of people. And the biggest challenge, therefore, is to ensure that ICT revolution does not cause divide. So that is the first conclusion of the deliberations that we ought to reach at, that we must take it as an emergent requirement of governance to bridge the ICT divide, the divide as a result of ICT. If we are not able to bridge this divide, we are going to face challenges, the seeds of which are getting sown, and you can see the symptoms happening every other day. ICT divide is going to cause the knowledge divide, which is going to cause anger, anguish, and total hiatus between the thinking, ideology, and cultures. The cultures are going to get divided if the ICT divide is not bridged. So that is one, and then you have social media. Social media is another major paradigm, which is giving power in the hands of people. Social media unites people, which can be either for a constructive way or for a destructive way. Many countries have set upon, and Indian government also in Department of Information Technology have set upon determining citizen engagement frameworks, basically to ensure that social media does not destroy but construct. That citizens' power is harnessed and channelized in constructive pursuits. And what would be those constructive pursuits? When you harness social media through citizen engagement frameworks for engaging the people in constructing pursuits, those would be pursuits where you would pass on part of governance in the hands of people. Governance would keep on shifting to the hands of people as social media keeps on evolving in a constructive way. The examples are, let's say, traffic police. Most of the cosmopolitan towns, metropolitan towns in the country, the traffic police there is on social media and is seeking engagement of people in management of the traffic, in identifying the traffic violators, in identifying sometimes the vehicles and automobiles which are not following the rules, and so on and so forth. Police is one organization. There are many other organizations which are using power of the people through social media for helping them in carrying out governance in a more structured way. This is the way interest groups are going to get created, which will partake decision making in the government in a manner that their voice becomes a tool to reckon with. And that is where need would arise, where part of governance would better be shifted to these interest groups based on social media. Governance would have to become minimal. Minimum government, maximum effect is what is going to be the outcome of social media as a tool, and as a tool of changing and transforming governance. Future of governance is what needs to be understood and thought about in the context of ICT intervening in the lives of people. And so there would be participatory, collaborative governance, minimal governance through ICT. And at that point, I would now like the subject to be handled by Mr. Deshmukh Verma, who could give his views on the way forward as he looks at it.
Thank you, Ravi. I would like to begin by complimenting Preeti and her team for organizing this beautiful two-day conference, and also for the design and the structure of it. And I think, as she herself said, it is a great finale of the whole thing when we are now trying to discuss as to what capacity building is required to actually usher in this kind of change. While I compliment Preeti for the structure and the design of the program, I'm a bit curious about the selection of the moderator. That's my, I don't know what I'm telling her that I'm a bit surprised about the selection of the moderator because Ravi, whom I have the good fortune of knowing for a long, long time, is anything but a moderate. From everything, from his views in different walks of life on different subjects, and his views, his urge for change, his desire for ushering in some changes, it has always been profound. And as you can see from what he talked just now, those views were expressed by you. And I think after what he has said, there are very few things which need to be said now. What I would like to touch upon is the issue that has been raised in this session as a preliminary note, and is that about the capacity building and what problems actually come when you talk of the change paradigm shift in the governance. One issue, and when I'm talking about this, I'm talking from the government's point of view, and that has also to be understood by the audience. The biggest challenge, I think, in this kind of a paradigm shift is that how to change the system from within. While you are part of the system and you want to change the system, it's a very, very difficult job. Most of the times, the way the government is structured, the way government functions, people who are the urge for change, people like Ravi Saxena, who have the urge for change, who want to bring the change, but within the system, they would not get either the opportunity or the space to perform. And unless you give them opportunity and the space to perform, this kind of a change cannot be brought in. So the first recommendation which I thought should also come from this seminar, which I thought was a very practical solution, that to bring a change from within the system, you need to have some people who are isolated from the system, who are separate from the system, isolated from the system, and they still have a very deep knowledge of the system. Only then a kind of change is possible. And other issue is regarding giving them a space, because for providing a change, you have to have the space to perform. If you have the space to perform, to bring a change in the system, you have to have the support at the highest level, many times political support, which is many times not there. And unless you have those changes, Ravi talked about process re-engineering. The process re-engineering, that cannot be brought in for the simple reason that you are a product of that process. You are working on that basis of that process. And for process re-engineering, you need to have a separate team, a separate group to work on this. And that's one of the recommendations that I would like to make. The other issue, which again was raised by Ravi, is that in many departments, our systems are archaic, the ones which have been brought in by the British system, and we know that they are outdated, they have not been able to live up to the test of the times, and we want to change it, but we don't know how to go about it. The incremental changes will not bring those results. You have to sort of, I call, destroy and rebuild. In Gujarat, I was there for a few years back, and I went to that area which is affected by earthquake, Kutch and Bhuj area. And the new buildings which have come up, if you see them, they are so beautiful, it feels as if you are in a European country, in a suburb of a European country. The reason is that it has to distract. If you are only making incremental changes into those cities or in those villages, then the change will be very minimal. That probably will not impact the lives of people. But when it was destroyed and it was rebuilt, then what came out is something which is somebody to model. Somebody has to really look at it to realize and understand what kind of creation it has been. So in our several parts of our system, when you want to make the changes, a change which is phenomenal, a change which is going to impact the lives of the people, you have to probably destroy and rebuild. And for destroying and the rebuilding, there is space in between, the time gap, the space gap. How do you actually organize that? For that, the decision makers have to be ready, The people who are willing to do it, they have to be brought in, they have to be given the opportunity, they have to be given the space, and we have to have the systems for that. We have to have tools for that where people can afford to do this. While I'm talking of destroying and then rebuilding, I think the people's anger that you are talking about in several places, and people say that no, this is a system which doesn't deliver at all. We want to totally change it. It is the manifestation of that kind of frustration. Because you realize that any small changes, a minister goes and says, no, 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 we'll catch the culprits within 10 days. No, 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 we'll put them into the law, will take its own course and we will do it in 15 days time, 30 days time. But people don't believe it. Because people have lost faith in the system. And that system over the time has shown that it has not been able to deliver. And therefore, in several areas, there is now a need for rebuilding a change. I am work in the Parliamentary Affairs Ministry, and the Parliamentary Affairs Ministry people give very different kind of, they send several kinds of letters to the Prime Minister, to the Parliamentary Affairs Minister, to me, and they come out with some suggestions which are generally weird, and people think that this cannot be worked upon. Yesterday I was going through my dark, I saw one letter from somebody written by someone in very funny English, and it says that if you want to improve the system, don't tinker with any other system, only puncture the real estate. That's the only thing that he said. And he said that I am a jeweler and I am now giving ideas to my to some of the ideas which come to me, and I am now going to pin it down and send it to you. So it has been sent to several people. And he says, and he gives a very good logic. And he says that where there is an inflation of 10% and 15%, we are bothered so much about that. But the real estate, where there is an inflation of 500% and 1000%, we are paying very little attention to that. So please look into that. And for that again, these changes that he is suggesting are revolutionary. And somebody has to really look at it, sit over that and think about it. Only then these changes can come. The incremental changes will not do for this country. Many a system that we have put in place, maybe at that point of time we thought that it is good for the country, good for the system, but over the years we have realized that's not. And therefore there would be, somebody has to get up, have the courage in the government, outside the government, the civil society, to say that we have to totally rebuild it, totally demolish it and rebuild it. Only then the effective governance, improvement in the governance, that might come. The one more issue that I would like to raise here, and I am limiting myself to issues of building capacities and issues which are impediments in governance, in the improvement in the governance, is the lack of professionalism in the country, and that also has to be built in, because as everybody says that we have this concept of chalta hai, the system. Even in the government, what we do is that when we make a new law, when we make a new scheme in place, what we do is we make a law, put it in place and say after some time we'll change it. If there is a problem, we'll change it. But what happens is it is easy to make a law but very difficult to change it. When you put a law in place, it is there, put in the mechanism, systems are built around that. Then after that it becomes very, very difficult to change that. And we, while making the law, generally we are very lax. We say that, okay, let it go and we'll see it later. That kind of work that is required to be done, that kind of insight that has to go into this, that's generally lacking, and that is something which again, very important issue for the capacity building. I will stop at that because I thought it will be more of a interactive session, and I think I would like to respond when people raise different questions and issues. Thanks.
Thank you, Dilip. Very appropriately, he's taken the discussion forward by suggesting that it's disruptive innovation, which alone is going to be effective in the paradigm of governance that we have today, which inherits most of its processes from the British. And also the point he made is that those who are part of this government, part of this paradigm, may not be able to carry out this kind of disruptive innovation, and we need to have elements coming from outside to initiate or trigger this kind of disruptive innovation which is required for bringing about a total change which alone will meet with the expectations of people. And at that point, I'd like to invite Ajay, who's been with the NEGD, to tell us how National E-Governance Program introduces the concept of disruptive innovation and capacity building through National Institute of Smart Governance and the state e-mission teams, which have been introduced as a result of the National E-Governance Program, and how has been the experience of these teams. Now that he's got back into the state, you will also know how his department is responding to NEMT, the one which he triggered at Delhi when he was in Delhi a few months ago.
Very good afternoon to all of you. And I think I've been with the National E-Governance Division for about 2 years, and now I've moved over back into the state government, and I'm handling the health department currently. So I'll touch on the issue from experience, both as CEO, President and CEO, National E-Governance Division, and now that I'm back in the state. What do I see? So, the Government of India actually has a plan, the National E-Governance Plan, which started with 27 mission mode projects. So the overall planning was that we must have common infrastructure, common ICT infrastructure, let every department and every department, both at the center and state, and then municipalities and panchayats, not have to create its own servers and sort of lot of common infrastructure. So on one side, create the state wide area networks, create the state data centers, ensure that the offices get connected to each other and to good ICT infrastructure. On the other side, also roll out common service centers, and later the concept of providing services on mobiles also has come in. And on the third element is the middle portion, a large number of projects which are sector specific or domain specific. These projects were again divided into central integrated projects, which are both to be implemented both by the center and states, and those projects that are to be implemented by the states. So where have we actually reached? I think we have made significant progress on number one, on getting the basic infrastructure in place. The state wide area networks are operational in almost 30 states now out of 35 states and UTs. These networks have gone at least to the block level, if not below. What needs to be done in the area of state-wide area networks, the path has actually been shown by Gujarat, where when they started the state-wide area network, they didn't plan it only as a vertical network from state to district to block. They actually also simultaneously planned it as a horizontal network, both at the state level, district level, at the state level, they actually connected all their departments with very high capacity lines at that stage, fiber optic lines. At the district level, a large number of departments, I think they started with about 20 or 30 departments at the district level and also at the block level. So, in fact, they went a step forward and disconnected the telephones, or they said that only this will be used when we have to talk to each other within the state government. So that actually helped tremendously. So that is one step which still has to be taken to strengthen the state-wide area networks and make them a potent force. We have to make sure that the state-wide area networks don't connect just state with district and become channels for video conferencing, but also become channels for active data exchange and rolling out the services by making sure that all the district offices are connected, all the offices at the block level are connected, eventually all the primary healthcare centers, the community health centers, the area hospitals, and finally even the schools and panchayats are all connected. That is the time when actually the network really starts becoming a formidable force for progress. Sorry.
That is the hardware, the infrastructure, but what is very important is we created an application backbone, statewide application backbone. It's called Integrated Workflow and Document Management System. Now this is an application which runs across the entire government. There are more than 300 applications which ride on that. Integrated Financial Management System, Hospital Management Information System, Home Department Integrated Information System, AgrisNet, they all ride on this. Now I want you all to understand the material difference between NEGP at center and the way we began our experiment 10 years back in the state. Very rightly, NEGP began with mission mode projects. So it told each of the Government of India departments that wherever you have a citizen interface, like income tax, like Ministry of Company Affairs, registration of companies, like railways. So their emphasis was that delivery of services to the citizens must be through the computing, While in Gujarat we began by saying all government business must be done in an integrated way on an application backbone which connects the departments. Government of India would have to go a long way to connect all the departments and have the workflow flowing from one department to another on a backbone. Now this having been done 10 years back puts us in a very strong state, good state. And I can tell you from experience that both populating wide area network across offices horizontally, having unified communication, as he said, once you own the network across offices, there is no reason why you again have BSNL telephone lines connecting you for voice alone. So that, and thirdly, having a common application backbone becoming acceptable, point DD made, acceptable to all the government people, is actually a huge exercise. This you who are in the government would feel fine. Like bringing about this change to switch over to the application backbone, to switch over to complete IT way of doing things. It requires a lot of things to synergize together. So I think this integrated workflow and document management system has also put us in a good state. Sorry, sir.
Apart from the unfinished work on the networks itself, I think there are state data centers that have come up. NIC has a set of very large national data centers. Each of the state governments has been encouraged and financed by the Government of India to set up state data centers. And I think by now about 17 or 18 of them have come up. By the end of this year, all the state data centers will be in place. Again, there is unfinished work there because the simply the availability of a state data center doesn't mean that every department is sort of very happy to move in, and people have already servers and they have their applications, they have well established systems. So the effort to actually roll it out as a set of services which you would typically see like the Amazon Web Services, where you can actually take services from these data centers and the networks almost for the asking. So that transition still needs to be made between having state data centers and making them extremely friendly and usable by the departments. Because the only customers for this central or common infrastructure is actually not the citizens directly. It is the departments which are the clients for this entire infrastructure, and that client-centric approach is required to make it possible for every department to start using the infrastructure in a big way. Apart from that, there are also what are called the National Service Delivery Gateway and the State Service Delivery Gateway. These are the hidden, it's like the heart of the system. So between one department, the way the software suite is working in Gujarat, that is a workflow application which makes it possible for everyone to communicate and for decision making to happen on top of that. But where a large number of transactions are involved, where commercial taxes are collected and banking system is involved, or where permission has to be given for a new industry to be set up, where multiple departments, the municipality, the fire services department, and a number of other departments, land related departments all get involved. The gateways are actually in place. They are already in place in a large number of states, but again they are not very actively utilized. That aspect also, I think there is a fair amount of unfinished work. So on one side, I think we have done reasonably well on getting the base infrastructure in place. This is the watershed year actually, 2013, when most of our infrastructure will be in place. Connecting it up and helping departments use it in a very proactive manner is the way forward here. On the access channels, which was the other end from where we started by also promoting the common service centers. The forerunner of this was the eSeva project in Andhra Pradesh, where about 60 different centers in Hyderabad provide access to more than 100 services, any counter, any service, any time kind of a situation. So that spread into the common service centers, and about 1 lakh common service centers are currently in place across the country. Again, the centers came in quicker than the services. So the investments were made by private entities, and a lot of creative effort also happened. Unfortunately, the creative effort in the private sector and from the investors happened before the government services started getting rolled out. So there has been a mismatch between availability of services and the availability of the access channel, as a result of which about 10-20,000 of these service centers actually closed down for want of services. Others have been struggling. Only about 30 to 40% have actually been doing well and getting enough revenue to sustain their operations. So a fair amount of work now that we also have mobiles and possibly tablets, any mobile devices becoming routes for access to government information and services. I think again that entire ecosystem has to be thought through, and we have to again revive and ensure that sufficient services, sufficient revenue actually starts flowing into these outlets. Gujarat again has been a nice innovator in this. They actually combined the infrastructure at the panchayat level with the concept of the service point for citizens, not only for services from the panchayat, but the general services which common service centers are expected to provide. The third major area was actually getting in place the actual projects that start providing services from every sector or domain. In that we have central sector projects, we have integrated projects, and we have state sector projects. Typically, it is the central projects which have done well. So we started with success. Of course, railways is not a not a NEGP project, but railways is the first success again from the central sector, because there is an advantage in having one organization and then planning. You might plan to do something in 3 years' time. It may take you 5 years, but you get there eventually. So railways, customs, income tax, then later on passport, company registration, all of these projects have moved well, and we have had very good successes in the central sector projects, followed by Aadhaar, which is now gathering momentum, and so many of these projects have moved ahead. Where we have had difficulty and where the progress is very uneven, some of the states have done spectacularly well, but others are struggling, is the state sector projects and the ones which are from local government. So the difficulty with e-governance or with governance in India is that while the center has a lot of resources, it is the states and the local governments which are expected to provide services which people use day in and day out. So income tax is something which troubles you once a year. The tax transactions also trouble only a particular sector, the commercial taxes and others. But the work which you require or the services you require from the government come to you most of all from your local government, from the municipal government, followed by services from the state government, and followed by services from the central government. The progress we have made has been the other way around. We have made maximum progress in the central services, we have made less progress in the state services, and we have hardly made progress in municipal and panchayat level services. So it is when these services start kicking in and start becoming available, it is that time when people actually will start feeling that yes, something significant has happened. We have also not taken up major sectors initially. Education and health were felt to be far too complex to take up in the initial stage of the program, and these have come in. Again, the major areas where work still has to be done, which are primarily where state governments have to move forward or local governments have to move forward. One is municipal services. We have successes everywhere. We have successes in each and every sector, but we don't have a success with a nationwide footprint. We have successful municipalities, some spectacularly good work which is done, not available in 95% of the municipalities. We have successes in panchayats, not available in from a large number of panchayats. We have success in education, health, land records, registration, policing, the e-cops type of a project. Even in courts, we have had success in different parts of the country. But it's isolated successes currently. So the way forward, the challenge currently is how to pick up those successes and give it a nationwide footprint. And that has been the effort which is engaging attention both of the Secretary, Department of IT and the entire e-governance team. We from our side are thinking of 2013 as a watershed year when a large number of these services will actually gather momentum. Instead of pilot projects, we have also started encouraging the states to actually start looking at services which are operational, the geographical area over which the services are operational, and the number of transactions which are actually happening. So this is a change from the time when we were sort of encouraging states to simply go ahead and do new projects. So now consolidation and spread is becoming the more important thing. The partners for us, or the luckily this year we also have the spectre of momentum in Aadhaar, of mobile having spread almost everywhere, of cloud-based technologies that have come in and are suddenly making it possible for us, to have a cloud-based or a central, well-designed application, and simple access is all that you require, both from the offices and from the citizens' side. So all of these are actually happening simultaneously. The financial services, banking again has come in strongly. One reason being the direct benefit transfer scheme, but banking also has come in strongly, and we expect that the combination of Aadhaar, mobile, cloud, the availability of a huge common infrastructure, not only for government offices and government departments, but also for citizens to access the services, will play a major role, and 2013 would probably be a watershed year in this regard.
Thank you, Ajay. I think you made quite a few valuable points. But maybe, as this is a panel discussion, maybe I reflect on some of the issues that were made. First was central applications have got more success than the state applications. And let's see which are these central applications. I think apart from railways, as you said, which is very successful, income tax is another which is a very successful application. Company affairs, MCA, I think, is another very successful application. Customs has been countrywide integrated application.
And UID itself.
So, and passports. Passports is another. Yeah, passports is another very successful. Now, why these have been successful? And that is where I had mentioned that connectivity is one of the major factors for the success of e-governance. All these applications operate in areas where connectivity is not a challenge. If passports were to be issued from the villages, you would not. If villagers had to file income tax returns, they would have to come to a town. If companies have to be registered from the villages, then it will be difficult. So connectivity is the game changer, let me tell you. Connectivity will cut both ways. Connectivity will make things easier for people to avail of the government services. Connectivity will also pose greater challenges to the government, for the citizens would be far more empowered to register their views, to register their desires, register their needs. So connectivity is the game changer, and the point I made, I'd like to reiterate, that government must change before the connectivity reaches. And the government must see that it meets up the expectations before the connectivity becomes universal. What have we done in Gujarat? Setting modesty at naught, let me just say, the way forward in some measure would be what we are doing there in Gujarat. In Gujarat, we have been able to move forward in as much as we have created a connected Gujarat. I spoke to you about the connectivity up to the taluka level. The recent experiment made by the Chief Minister was to take the government to taluka. As you know, district is the unit of administration for now more than 100 years. Everybody has to visit the district headquarters for getting his decisions taken. Decisions are largely taken at the district level. Last year, it was decided in Gujarat that let's move reasonable part of the district decision making to taluka. And the title euphemistically was given Apro Taluko, Vibrant Taluko, ATVT. So ATVT today is the step by which district was taken to taluka. What does it mean? The granularity of the administration or the administrative services has been improved. Today, one taluka's population has an additional collector. Instead of tehsildar that you have in the taluka, the posts were raised to additional collector level, and all departments were asked to hurriedly, emergently delegate powers to this additional collector. So, good deal of collectors' powers were delegated to the additional collector posted in a taluka. Most of the ideal was that no citizen should be made to travel beyond taluka level for his decision making. Now, I am telling you that this is a very important step that would have to be taken. You see, this is a feudal model where 1,000 villages. In India, an average district has about 1,000 villages. And taluka has 100 villages. You cannot anymore administer 1,000 villages from one center. You have to administer not more than 100 villages from one center. This would have to be done. This is one step. You have to shift the power decision making center to a smaller place, sub-district place. That is number one. We have connected villages. So you see, 2003, the Chief Minister felt that we should connect all the villages. You know, the CSC scheme was about to be launched. This has not yet been launched. And the CSC, that is Community Service Centers of the NEGP, envisage one community service center in 6 villages. In 2000, which will be have a connected service point. So which means there will be internet. Now you need connectivity, you need a village where BSNL has taken its fiber. Gujarat has 18,000 villages. We looked around in 2003 as to what is the connectivity level. We found even in a state like Gujarat, we had only 8,000 villages carrying the fiber. So there was no connection in rest of the 10,000 villages. And we wanted to create a connected Gujarat. So what we did was, we took bandwidth from Bangalore hub of the Airtel, pumped it to the satellite, and we created 18,000 VSATs. Every village was given a VSAT, and this bandwidth was showered on all the 18,000 villages. This is called eGram. From 2006, I think, or 7, we have an intranet across 18,000 villages of the state. So today you have GSWAN, Gujarat State Wide Area Network, connecting 30 districts, 250 talukas, and we have eGram connects 18,000 villages. And with a special permission of the Department of Telecom, recently last month, we have been permitted to connect the two. So today we have a completely connected Gujarat. Now out of the bandwidth which is showered on the 18,000 villages, a pipe of 13 Mbps is kept reserved for video conferences. So we have 35 pairs of video conferences going on between villages, or villages to taluka, taluka to villages, or Chief Minister can directly have a video conference with a village. But this pipe is reserved, this pipe is meant only for video conferences. So this is what you need to do for improving the granularity of services, delivery of services. This is one thing which we need to do as a way forward. You have to provide means of expression to people at the grassroots level. If you don't provide means of expression there, it will be anguish which will get resulted. Financial implications are significant. It is not that it is without financial implications, and most of the money is kept by the central government. The state governments don't have money, and yet it's a question of priorities. What do you do with your money? You can either create large infrastructure projects, or you can create ICT projects. In Gujarat, fortunately, I am there for the last 3 years as Additional Chief Secretary of Science and Technology. I have never heard no for anything I wanted to do. On science and technology, we are always in a position where we are not able to spend the money. So such is the priority of the government for technology improvement. So taking the government to a lower level of lower unit of administration, connecting the last posts electronically, and third, what Ajay mentioned very correctly and effectively, there is applications are required to be there. Creating infrastructure by itself does not mean much. Today, we have an application, for instance, where any citizen of Gujarat in the villages can go to any internet device. With a thumb reader, he has to put his thumb, and his ration card barcoded coupon will come out. Now, this is a footloose public distribution system. If the person has migrated from one place to another, he has to go and put his thumb, and he'll get that month's entitlement of rations as a barcoded ration card. Now, this coupon he has to go and give it to a PDS, that is public distribution system shop. Now, there he gets, the PDS gets his entitlement as a sum total of all the coupons that it has received. We have demonstrated, I don't have the figures, how we have first of all weeded bogus ration cards in hundreds of thousands by introducing this system, and we have weeded out huge quantities of leakage in the distribution system to public, to the fair price ration shops by virtue of this application. This application was evaluated in Delhi, even by the Supreme Court of India. They, as a matter of fact, mandated the Civil Supplies Department of Government of India to populate this across the whole country. Now, this is, so there would be a project perhaps in Civil Supplies, you would know better. Now, what it means is, this is just a case in point, what it means is you create the necessity at the village and they'll take to it. They'll take to the applications which fulfill their requirements, and the infrastructure would get used. Now, there is one more point that I, again, coming to the broader perspective, I want to raise, and I would like both my worthy colleagues to respond to. He has been in center and has now gone to the state, and he's been in the center. He's come from the state and come to the, from the center to, from the state to center. For changing the paradigm of decision making, do we need a review of the center-state relationship? Do we need review of the distribution of powers? Can you continue to be looking at the country from Delhi? If you continue to do that, and if Finance Commission takes away most of the money for the center and leaves very, very little, Gujarat contributes hugely to the overall finances of the country, but gets less than 3%. So fortunately, we have been agitating this issue in Planning Commission since long. So what Government of India has done, very rightly, logically, that most of their schemes like NGP are no more, the disbursements are not based on that index, which was the index of Finance Commission. We have been saying that the state which performs better must get money to fulfill its project program. Earlier the system was that the state which is most backward would get more money, would not be able to spend it and all. So the structure of the schemes has changed now. They are more project-oriented schemes. But I think that we need a much larger review of the way this federation of states should operate. If we really want to fulfill the ambitions of the people, aspirations of the people, and if you consider meeting with the aspirations of the people as the sole goal for the way forward, then, as Ajay said, most of the schemes which are dealing with the daily requirements of common man are led by the states. And there has to be good enabling environment and financial system. Yes, I would like you to read.
No, while I would not like to dwell upon this issue of center-state relationships, but there is no denying the fact that there is a need for state governments to have more resources. But having said that, there is another issue, and I think you yourself raised that point when I asked the question that where are the finances available. Within the state also, the leadership, the bureaucracy or the government, they have to decide their priorities, whether you want to spend money for infrastructure projects or you want to spend money for the connectivity. in the same system. Gujarat can do it, Andhra Pradesh can do it, why not other states? That is because, and that I think is the issue of way forward, the capacity building is also required, that the leadership has to be so enlightened to understand the implications and the strength of this kind of connectivity. Most of the leadership, unfortunately, is enamored by inaugurating big projects and thinking that this will solve all the problems and ills of the state. There has to be have that kind of a thinking and a vision in the leadership, in the government functioning, that you understand where you want to put your money in.
I would like to make 2 points which will be very important as we move forward. Wherever we have taken up ICT project, irrespective of whether it is at center or states, etc., one aspect which is very important to understand and deal with is monopoly. So if you would remember the period when railways actually had computerization. So a lot of change had already come about, and instead of person behind the counter having a big register in which he would look whether any seat is available, there was a ICT system. But still you had to go to a railway reservation center, and sometimes you had to, depending on the rush, there was a time when even 2 to 3 hours you had to still stand in a queue in spite of ICT being. There was still monopoly. So how do you government itself is a monopoly. So most of the government services are monopoly services. But while can you restrict monopoly at the back end and in the front create a method by which large number of service providers are actually competing for your attention? That is one thing which actually makes a huge difference in the citizen experience with projects. Even the finest of projects, if it doesn't shatter the monopoly, for instance, for registration of land and immovable property transactions, we had a very successful project called e-card, the card project in Andhra Pradesh. But still a lot of malpractice and corruption still prevailed, because you still have to go to a particular office, and that office has complete hold on whether your transaction will be performed or not performed. So to actually break that, it became essential to connect up all the offices and to provide a choice in many ways. So in some areas, because of our laws, etc., it is not possible to actually make everyone a service provider. But that is one huge step. Everywhere, wherever you make the service available from large number of competing service access providers, the citizen experience improves. So shattering monopoly is extremely important. In this, I would like to mention the work that is getting done in Mi Seva project in Andhra Pradesh. Mi Seva is not my Seva. Mi Seva in Telugu means yours service to you. So in Mi Seva, the major difference is that anticipating what kind of services people would come to government for. For instance, students during the admission season come to government for caste certificate, nativity certificate, income certificate, and for land records. When it is crop season, a large number of farmers again troop into Tehsil offices for their land related certificates, because they have to get bank loans. So anticipating that such certificates are required, taking the entire database, cleaning it up, validating it in the field several months in advance, digitally signing and keeping the data available so that a citizen can go or a student can go to any center and get the service across the counter. that has been a huge change. Again, it is scheduling monopoly and it is providing you a guaranteed service. You simply have to go to the nearest available location where you will take a printout which gets authenticated and given to you on payment of some 10 rupees or 15 rupees or whatever. So that is one aspect. The second aspect I would like to mention is that government, the first phase of e-governance has been on what is called actually e-government, which is government services to citizens. Now, government is not there only to provide services to citizens. Government is also the creator of an ecosystem which allows everyone to participate very actively. So, an ecosystem in health, it is not only public health institutions that are today providing services to the citizens. A large number of private clinics and nursing homes and hospitals are also in the same operation. Similarly, so the government's role doesn't end with only its own services being accessible to or being available to the citizens. The government's role is also to create an enabling ecosystem which allows everyone to participate and economic activity to happen sector after sector after sector. So I think the second area in which we have to devise the way forward is how does government move the entire emphasis of e-governance away from only, we still have unfinished work in that, but we should not be focusing today only on providing our own services to the citizens. We should also be focusing on creating an ecosystem in education, an ecosystem in health, an ecosystem in agriculture, an ecosystem in sector after sector, where a large number of private providers can also take advantage, and people can actually use the strength of ICT for income generating and sort of simplifying their whatever they require as they proceed in life.
Are we speaking too much? Yeah, I just want to make one comment on your first point regarding that breaking the monopoly. I think that is important. But more than that, what is important is the enabling and giving powers in the hands of the user, the consumer. Because if you break the monopoly from one department, you give it to 5 departments. But still that person has to come. I think the change in the railway has come after the user himself was able to go online, see what are the vacancies, do the bookings, and he has that information that I booked at such and such time. And the moment that came, that was the game changer. Till they were only computerized and they were having all the information, that much of change did not come. So I think the enabling and the strengthening the end user, that I think is more important, where connectivity issue comes.
So I think, very important point, this question of breaking the monopoly. Now the monopoly, I'll just spot to it in 2 parts. One is, why did we dread the monopolies? Because of the opaqueness of monopoly. Monopoly always was opaque, and ICT has generic capacity to make things transparent. The moment things become transparent, monopolies are not hurting. That's one. But 2 years back, Ajay and I were in one of the DET conferences, sitting on a dais, discussing government as managed services. Conceptually, on a conceptual front. And this connects with the same point which I made about citizen engagement framework and social media and governance going in the hands of citizens through social media, minimal governance and some of those, the whole paradigm of future of governance that I mentioned in the beginning. Government as managed service would mean, while passport cannot be issued by a public, an interest group of citizens, that has to be done by regional passport office. But the entire process up to the passport, can it not become a managed service? Similarly, almost in every other thing that government does, a part of the process can be rendered as a managed service and competitive environment created so that efficiency and effectiveness is brought into that part of the process. And then it comes for the decision making. This government as a managed service, I was just reminding him, 2 years back I mentioned in a DET conference in this place itself, perhaps India Habitat Center. Krishnan was there, and you were there, and we started then government in the cloud. So that's where I would like to close this issue of monopoly, where you can break the process and make a large part of it as a managed service. There were some other issues you had mentioned. I wanted to just make a little comment on those. On SDC utilization and the utilization of wide area networks, data centers not being trusted and things like those. What we've done in Gujarat, I've written it also somewhere. I say government on G cloud, government cloud. You know what is cloud? Cloud is no big concept. Cloud is getting infrastructure on bhada. Take it on rent, then it is cloud. I mean, people connect cloud with something up there. There is nothing like that. It's called cloud because that infrastructure comes to you through some internet, and the typical perception of the internet is that it comes from the cloud. Internet may not come to you through cloud. As you know, all across the world there are cables which are lying in the seabed connecting the world, and there is no cloud connected internet. So this cloud is a very the government on G cloud means what we do is I have taken budget for all the servers of all applications of all departments into my department. So if an application of agriculture department is to be made, I'll say I will pay for your servers and infrastructure. A very costly part of the application is the licenses which you take for database management systems, licenses for security, licenses for the firewalls and the intrusion prevention systems, intrusion defense systems. Now these all we pay from my department's budget. So I offer data center as a cloud to the departments. They don't have to worry about whether I need to upgrade the servers, whether I need to upgrade the license, I have to buy the ATS every year. That is all my business, my department's business. They shut their door, I provide government or data center as a managed service to the departments. Then they find it much easier to utilize data. Gradually, I also tell them that look, I have spent 11 crores of licenses just to make the data center secure. If you run your own servers, you cannot. And I'll tell you a very amusing story. The state election department in Gujarat decided to have online voting. So when they decided to have online voting, they said, no, our servers have to be in our department because on the day of election, I'll have to open the server room, bring all the political parties and show them the server room that we are doing nothing wrong with it. Now you can imagine server room will not show anything. It's not like opening the ballot boxes and showing कि भाई पहले से इसका ballot नहीं डाला हुआ है. मैंने उनको समझाने की कोशिश करी कि सर इसमें आपको कुछ दिखा नहीं पाएंगे. उन्होंने उसका लोहे का दरवाजा लगा के उसके ऊपर ताला लगा के और लैक से सील भी कर दिया कि वो वोटिंग के दिन हम लोग खोल के देखें. उसके लिए उन्होंने सर्वर मेरे पास नहीं रखे. फिर बाद में जब क्वेश्चन केम ऑफ बाइंग द सिक्योरिटी लाइसेंसेस फॉर then I figured out that it will run into crores. The security licenses are, I said, if you don't have security, then your separate server room will serve no purpose. Then now he is saying that you take my servers to your data center and all. I said, how will you show the political parties? I don't have access to them in my server, my data center. But gradually people have realized and offering infrastructure as a cloud by one department to the rest, that has served a purpose. There was, okay, I think now we should close our discussion here and throw it up for questions. Please indicate whom do you want to ask the question.
So I am Amit Sharma, Additional Secretary, Government of Jammu and Kashmir. So I have been attending to this conference since yesterday, and I have attended even as one of the panelists in 1 or 2 sessions. I have said 2-3 things in mind which I just want, because we have got an opportunity to have you on board, and we can definitely know how the policies are going on and things are going on with Ajay sir and you and even Desh Deepak sir. Sir, one thing we are often hearing and listening, that is, sir, regarding the Gujarat model, I would like to broadly say, if I am incorrect, kindly correct me, that I believe that very intelligent kind of working has been taken over by the leadership also, in the sense like, I believe that regarding the infrastructural, there are two things which we have just been able to understand. One is infrastructural investment and second is connectivity investment. Now they had to make the trade-off between the two. And I believe very intelligently what has actually happened is connectivity, a lot of emphasis and a lot of funding has gone into, and infrastructure, luckily the vision of the government as well as the system has been like this, that they have been able to attract from outside, and even bigger projects coming up and all that. So the recent last few days back, the kind of invites they sent through that Divas and celebration, and that's an indicator. So they didn't have to actually go in for much of spending on infrastructure. So that was a successful story. I think major reason behind the success story of a state like Gujarat. That I thought I could make out. Sir, regarding the governance model, Ajay sir must be knowing, because he has been doing it very successfully those 2 years he had here. So sir, we want to know that we think we have heard many states now switching over to mobile governance kind of model. And we know that the future lies here. Already much has been done in this respect. I was reading some material also, like few states already, like Kerala or maybe some other states, you may be knowing better, sir. So sir, I just want to know a little bit more about mobile governance and where the future lies, and what are the initiatives and what are the nitty-gritties, what needs to be done. Because Jammu and Kashmir is still in infancy stage, and we have done substantial, but I believe we are far behind when I hear the Gujarat model and Andhra and such fantastic models. Thank you.
Actually, mobile will have impact both from the service provider's side and from the service seeker's side. So when I look at health services, which is more a greenfield area for ICT in large parts of the country. First, get the service providers themselves. There's such an army of service personnel. The auxiliary nurses and midwives, we have about 20,000 of them. ASHA workers, we have 75,000 of them. So there, even though we have a very well-designed system called mother and child tracking system, which tracks the services being given to pregnant women and then to infants and newborn, and right up to 5 years of age. The use of that system itself was extremely difficult, with whatever be the number of whatever be the investment we make in PCs in the offices. But with mobiles, suddenly it is possible for them to send in the data and to actually use the data themselves very close to the time when the transaction actually happens. So that's a huge game changer from the department side itself, in having far better control on data flow and being able to get an idea as to, the moment a service is not being delivered, you are able to ask questions and find out that yes, something, this particular vaccine has not reached, or this particular medicine is out of stock today. So something which you can't do if the data flows 2 months or 3 months late. So on one side, mobile actually creates a big tool for the departments themselves to get a handle on what is happening. But when citizens actually start using mobiles, and when you actually enable mobile to be a access channel for government services, that is the time when that demand side pressure would rise. No matter what you do on supply side, till the demand side actually is vibrant, the services will not really show an improvement beyond the point. So it is demand side which actually makes a big difference, and so the services have to become increasingly available, directly accessible from the mobile. A simple SMS message which we get every time a banking transaction happens, it's such a tremendous source of confidence. It's that anytime anything is happening in your account, you are able to know. So starting with SMS, but not actually closing with SMS. So in the earlier session, I was mentioning, the session just before this, that a mobile ID which combines Aadhaar, mobile, financial services with PKI, a digital signature made a Janta phenomena. That means in 50 rupees or 100 rupees which a government may spend, or which one of the initial service providers might spend, equipping people with a SIM card which has your Aadhaar number and which has a digital signature, it makes it possible for you to access any kind of government services, any kind of a database with complete privacy, authentication, integrity of data flow and non-repudiation. So that is something which is already done in a number of small countries. We have to look at, we are doing an experiment now, and that might actually be where it's not just a government service you are applying for, but confidently you are able to access your data, you are able to see what is happening to your data in the government or in any government department, and you are able to have individual control over who can use the data for what purpose. So for that, this kind of tool might also prove to be handy.
SIM which does the magic trick. When it comes to mobile governance, well, we are on way to mobile governance. As I mentioned, mobile services delivery gateways are getting created in every state, but now we are taking a view largely at the central government level that there is no need for separate mobile service delivery gateways for every state. The national mobile service delivery gateway, like in Gujarat we are using, is good enough. All applications which are being developed in most of the states are mobile compliant. But a little mention here of what is a mobile. You see, it's a device. Basically, ultimately it will be a device, a handheld device, which will be smaller than a tablet and a little larger than maybe the current instrument communicating voice and data. But it is the SIM which will create the difference, as Ajay clarified just now, how big a magic trick SIM can do, because SIM creates a virtual network, which is a private network on which you ride. So the questions of privacy and all those are well taken care of. We are having an application getting rolled out now where 55,000 Anganwadis, the attendance of children, would be taken by a photograph, which will be taken by a handheld device, which could be a tablet of 2,000 rupees, which will automatically do the head count. The head count will get collated and compiled and communicated every day. So 55,000 Anganwadis, all children, head count done through a photograph and head count in a jiffy. Now, is there anything else which can do this? And how much of leakage you can prevent by this application? You mentioned something about Gujarat. I was reminded of what Kanak Ghosh said before this session. He was in Ahmedabad before the current government was in place in late 90s. The point is that there is no dispute about development, whether it's this party or that party. There is no dividing ideology or policy on the issue of development and on the issue of technology. The fact is, all these experiments were begun, let's say Wide Area Network. It was initiated in 1999. In fact, Andhra and Gujarat have moved almost simultaneously. We looked at AP as well. Andhra Pradesh State Wide Area Network was in place. Our integrated workflow document management system, I have myself gone and looked at Andhra's backward application in 1999, and the current government was not in place. Things have been moving since then. There has been absolutely no question of making them slower, which happens in many other states, that another government comes, thinks that everything which the previous government was doing must be reversed, and that is the most harmful thing that can happen. In Gujarat, there is absolute consensus about development. Any other
I have
questions?
a question.
Yeah.
I can speak loudly. Okay. My name is Brigadier Mandiratha. First of all, allow me to express my sentiments that to be hearing this kind of a thing actually makes me very proud that civil service officers are so involved and committed, and it's a tribute. I want to address Mr. Verma, and I think it was a great philosophy. He said that you really want something out of the way, then you need destroy and build. And hats off to Mr. Saxena, who's I think quite an intellectual, and he gave it a twist when he called it what? He called it disruptive innovation. And that's how you play with not only words but philosophy. While I agree with this, because I was also in Bhuj when this happened, and I did a lot of work there then, but that's immaterial. But at the same time, Mr. Verma, when you made it saying that you need space, I thought people, the way you all expressed, is doers and darings are the ones achieve and perform, not despite despite the system, not because of. And as far as when we talk of leaders, I know what is meant by is this political leadership. And political leadership actually thrives on people, and that requires populism. While populism is different, they also need voter support, and that is where I think the civil servants do a great job. And that person, whoever it may be, has to play ball. I'll leave it that to be commented upon, but I have one or two more things very quickly. One is that while ITC is bringing transparency and reach, how do you tackle people lower down where they actually don't want transparency, because opacity is the one which gives them power. And opacity means power. Power means money under the table. These days, not nothing under the table, it's everything over the table. And in this, allow me also to say, a person like me, actually when I flout my rule here and there, I want that rule to be twisted in my favor. So I also don't want. So I'm also happy in a little bit of opacity. How do we sort of reach out, and how do we do this, and how do we break these things at the grassroots level? Because while one sees the top level, there is so much illumination, and ground level, when you go and you have a broken chair and you have a person spitting on your face, and that's the reality of India which operates till today. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, I think very interesting point that you have made. But what was that phrase? Doers and? Doers and those dare. Okay. You see, what happens is that somebody has said very rightly that winners don't do different things, they do things differently. It is true that the doers and those who dare will be able to do it, but you have to give them an opportunity. Many a times you will not get an opportunity, and many a times when you are about to create, you can create this space, but you cannot create an opportunity by yourself. If Ravi Sahaj Saxena is in Department X and he thinks that he has the aptitude and the caliber to deliver in Department Y, he can't move to Department Y. But in Department X, of course, he can create this space. He can, as a winner, he can create a space and try to deliver. That he can do. But many times when he will try to do this in X, then he will be sent to Z. So he won't even get an opportunity. That is why I made the point of opportunity and space. That is very, very important. That has to be given to the civil servants or to the system, anybody who is the manager. The other point is also very interesting.
I was going to say, like guest minister, where actually minister is being handled. So that's
And the second point that you made is, what was that, Srinivas, sorry? Second point that you made. Yes, destroy. No, that you said that why, how do you change the people at the level below? Because there is a vested interest in that opacity. There is a nexus. If I am in the department, I don't want to change the system because it suits me. That is why I said that you have to have a system outside the system to change the system. You have to have a person outside this system who knows it, but he has lost all vested interest. So I have to change the Parliamentary Affairs Ministry. I should be asked to sit outside with no powers, but powers to change it. Then I will change it. If I am here, I have a vested interest, I will never change it. That is the issue that I was.
But this nexus you talked about between the person who wants and the authority which delivers, this nexus has been the model of governance. If you look at a historical perspective, from the times of Mughals to now, the government operated through nexus. It is continued until now. But look at railway tickets. Where is the nexus now? ICT has made things transparent. So ICT is a game changer in breaking this nexus.
Direct service and service which is available through choice of multiple competing service providers, or directly on the net where you can get your service and sort of run. So you have to remove the intermediaries and provide a very large choice to the citizens. The choice is the one which actually does away with corruption. No amount of policing will actually have that impact as giving a choice to this, simplifying the service, giving a direct service or giving a choice of service providers where they still have to go through some service providers.
And one of the most major quiet revolution that has got created in this country is through right to information. Right to information has been a great game changer in breaking this nexus. So anyway, other questions before I hand over this thing to Preeti?
I wanted to supplement one thing. Yesterday also I talked about in JNK one additional step has been taken in this behalf by providing a service guarantee act.
Yes. Public Service Guarantee Acts have taken shape in. You had discussions on electronic service delivery bill, which is pending with the Parliament, which is a very revolutionary bill. And Public Service Delivery Acts, as a matter of fact, when the bill was lying in the Parliament, the standing committee said that there was another bill which was basically Public Service Delivery Bill coming from ARTD. And the Parliamentary Standing Committee wanted the two to be combined. And I don't know whether you discussed this, but that is how it is now acquiring a shape, where the Public Service Delivery Bill and the Electronic Service Delivery Bill would be coming in a combined form before the Parliament. It has been done, and maybe in budget session or the summer session, it would get cleared. So I think with that, I think we would come to the closing of this session at the hands of Preeti. Would you like to take to the mic and conclude this?
Thank you so much. I thought just briefly, we've all been there for the discussions over the last day and a half. I thought I'll just briefly sum up each session by some of the questions that emerged. I'm sure we'll be sharing the report of the conference with everyone, and I know I'm horribly ill-equipped to capture everything that everyone said. But I thought when we were discussing public-private partnerships and electronic service delivery, for example, I think one of the key questions that came out from the kind of questions that were asked and the comments that were made is that how do you make it a value proposition for all the P's involved? And here we're talking not just the public sector, private partners, but also the people. How does it become a value proposition for all involved? And another thing was also technology is moving fast, and so are citizen expectations. How do you match the two? And I think to keep up with both was another interesting point that emerged. When we were talking about localizing solutions, I think the challenge before us is how do you localize solutions for a country which is as diverse, as dynamic, and as diffuse as sometimes India can be. And I think that is the challenge, not just for the government, but also for people who are trying to empower the government in different ways. Whether they are technologists or social entrepreneurs, I think that's the challenge before us now. And also, I think a lot has been said about the social media. I think the government's role in the use of social media, in regulating it, in using it, where personal and professional boundaries often are very difficult to define. I think one thing that I would like to hear also say is that we need to ask ourselves that not just as government, but how do we as citizens use the power of technology responsibly? I think it's not for us to always keep questioning the government. And that's, I think, an interesting question that I thought of when we were talking about social media. Mobiles, of course, enough has been said. It's now the new instrument of the future. We will have to figure out a way how do we actually empower people with the use of mobile phones, which almost every Indian now has. And I think towards the end, some very, very scary questions were raised in the cloud and cybersecurity session, in which, you know, we now have very sophisticated alarms that protect our homes. We have biometric systems that let us into our offices. But at the same time, as citizens, I think we are at greater risk than ever, given the kind of, you know, programs that are running and the kind of data that is out there and our use of technology. And I think most importantly, financial inclusion. So far, we've talked about, you know, a lot of people say Indians are not very good formal savers, that we'd rather buy gold than put money in insurance schemes. Most Indians are not insured. They don't have access to healthcare and other basic services. So I think that is a huge challenge for the government to when you have almost, I think, 3 times the number of mobile phones than you have bank accounts in a country. I think how do you include those citizens into your financial inclusion programs? I think that's a huge task for the government ahead. I would just like to also say, a lot of people asked us, why did we call it Invisible India? I think one very simple question is people who have so far not been counted into some of the schemes or some of the benefits of development that the country has seen over the last few years. But I'd like to make another point, which is something that we at iGovernment try to do. A lot of people say the government is corrupt. We even submit, even if you say that 90% of this country's government is corrupt, what about the 10%? And I think for me, that Invisible India is also something that we need to take into account. It's not just the people, it's people who are doing fabulous work. We've been to different states. We've heard so many good examples of administrators who are taking the lead in really changing the way we govern. And I think that Invisible India also needs to be taken into account, and that's been our effort at iGovernment to try and do. And I know that I used to write for Hindustan Times. I've said this to many people before. It was so easy to just pick up, sit in your computer and write an editorial in 2 hours, lambasting the government for something or the other that was wrong that day, and the front page to support the front page. But in the last 1.5 years, I've been extremely humbled and educated in the enormity of the task that is before our administrators, and not just our administrators, as I said, the others who support them. And I think that's something I've come to appreciate, and specifically I think I admire Mr. Verma, because I worked for one parliamentarian for 2 years and completely lost my mind. I think your task is truly Herculean. And I think another reason why we thought we'd do this conference was that it's easy for us to talk about solutions and raise questions. I think, but it's important to involve those who are familiar with the rhythms of how systems work. Whether it's people who are working to devise new technological solutions, or it's administrators who are trying to change the system from within, as you said, sir. I think it's important to take those people on board and harness, as my colleague John is not here, his favorite phrase is harness the power of collective thought. And I think how do we do that is what we tried to do in a small way in this conference. And finally, I'd just like to thank Mr. Saxena, Mr. Verma, and Mr. Ajay for being here. I could not have asked for a better panel. And also would like to thank the Department of Electronics and IT and UIDAI for providing the support that they did for this conference, as well as our partners EMC and Infotech Enterprises. I'd like to thank each and every member of the audience. I know a lot of you stayed here for all the sessions, and for that I'm truly grateful. We're trying to build this platform in a small way and hope that it becomes bigger with every conference that we do. And at the end, last but not the least, I'd like to thank all my colleagues at iGovernment and 9.9 Media. They have shared all the crises, the last minute changes, and the sleepless nights with me. And I'd like to send out a special thanks to all of them here. And thank you all very much for being here with us. Thanks. I'd also like to announce we have an electronics manufacturing conclave that we are doing specifically to look at how the government is promoting the manufacture of electronics domestically. So I would also like to invite all of you to participate if you're still in Delhi, and lunch will be served in the lawns.
Ladies and gentlemen, just hold on please, just hold on, give me a minute. I'm not a disruptive fellow. I'm taking upon myself, I'm daring myself, please be seated, give me a minute. Lunch will not go anywhere. Please be seated. Yeah, please be seated. Well, you'll say, who the hell am I? It doesn't matter who am I. I do have a name and I said that I'm Brigadier Mandela and that's why I got my Aadhaar number. So I'm an entity and I've got ID. I have, thank you sir. Okay, I'm here only to say that I think we need, and I'm saying on behalf of all of you, and you are allowing me that liberty, thank you, to express our thanks to Preeti and the team. In no order, I picked up because Preeti was the face of the conference and the coordinator. We had Mr. Giridhar, we had Rachit, the technology man, Shreyashis Singh, editor of Geek, and Kanak Ghosh there. There must be some more, I'm sure. I don't know their names.
Also there.
Yeah, there would be, like John was mentioned. Well, I'm sorry, I don't know. But all these things have come from various angles, which is digital or dotting or iGovernment and so on and so forth. And as I understand, Mr. Mathur, Anurag Das Mathur, I didn't meet him.
Mrs. Mathur.
Mrs. Mathur, I'm sorry to say, I'm not a brilliant man, so I'm out of the sync. So, would you all please, ladies and gentlemen, I think they give us hope, we must give them